beach! Keep low, watch the obstacles. Incoming, take cover!
Careful now, everyone gets a piece.
Such a lovely evening, thank you all.
Can I have the piece with the rose on it?
All right, men, we are taking heavy fire. Move off the beach now. Get to the seawall. The tide's coming in faster than we thought. They'll be here by dawn. Hold your positions. Take cover now! Move! Get off the road, they are coming back around.
On the morning of June 6, 1944, Erwin Rommel was not in France. He was in Germany, at his home in Herrlingen-Near-Ulm, celebrating his wife's 50th birthday. The most capable defensive commander in the German military, the man who had spent the previous months building the Atlantic Wall, driving his engineers and his construction crews to fortify every beach that the Allies might use for a landing, had left his command the previous day. He had driven to the airport at Paris, flown to Stuttgart, and driven home for the birthday celebration. He planned to spend a day with his family and then travel to Hitler's headquarters at Berchtesgaden to request additional Panzer divisions for the Normandy coast. At 6:15 in the morning of June 6, his chief of staff called him at home. The Allies were landing at Normandy. Rommel dressed, said goodbye to his wife, and drove back to his headquarters as fast as his car could carry him. He arrived at La Rochegayen, his command post in the Seine Valley, at approximately 10 p.m. that evening, 16 hours after first Allied troops had touched the Normandy beaches, 16 hours during which the critical decisions about the employment of the Panzer reserves that might have driven a landing back into the sea had been made, disputed, delayed, and ultimately not made in time to matter. The question that the Rommel story poses is one of the most tantalizing counterfactuals in military history. What would have happened if Rommel had been at his post on the morning of June 6? Would his presence have changed the outcome of D-Day? Could the commander who had insisted, against the opposition of most of the German military establishment, that the Panzers needed to be positioned at the beach and committed immediately to counterattack, have turned the Allied landing into a catastrophe that Rommel himself feared it would become if a strategic concept was not followed? I cannot give you a certain answer to that question. No one can. But I can tell you the story of the decision. The decision to leave for his wife's birthday, to trust that the weather was too bad for the Allies to land, to accept the absence from his post that the specific date had created, and what that decision meant in the specific context of June 6, 1944. Before I tell it, I want to ask you directly, if you've been watching this series and you haven't subscribed yet, please do it now. The next episode is going to be about Zhukov, about the order he gave that killed 80,000 Soviet soldiers in a single night driving toward Berlin, and about why Stalin made him give it. That story is coming soon. Subscribe and activate the bell so you know the moment it drops. And if this episode gives you something to think about, hit the like button. It helps the algorithm show this series to people who should be watching it. Now, back to Rommel. Back to the morning that changed everything. The specific operational situation in Normandy in the weeks following D-Day. The battle that Rommel found himself fighting after he returned to his headquarters illuminates both what his strategy had been designed to prevent and how completely it had failed to prevent it. The Allied beachhead that Rommel found on the evening of June 6 was not yet secure. The 5 beaches had been linked into a continuous front, but the front was shallow, in some places only a few miles deep, and the German forces around its perimeter were still capable of applying significant pressure. The specific opportunity that Rommel had feared would be missed, the window in which an immediate and concentrated armored counterattack might have driven the Allies back into the sea, had not closed entirely, but it was closing, and the specific conditions that Rommel had needed to exploit it. Armor at the beach, armor in sufficient strength, armor committed before the Allied air power established its pattern. were not present in sufficient degree to make the counterattack decisive. The 12th SS Panzer Division Hitlerjugend, one of the armored units that Rommel had wanted positioned at the coast and that had been held back by the command compromise, moved toward the Normandy front on June 6th and 7th. Its movement was attacked repeatedly by Allied aircraft, suffering losses before it reached the front that degraded the force available for the counterattack it was supposed to make. The specific pattern that Rommel had predicted, armored units destroyed by air power during the approach march, arriving at the front too weak and too late to fulfill their intended role, played out in exactly the way he had warned. The Panzer Lehr Division, the most powerful armored formation in the theater and one that Rommel had wanted near the coast, had been positioned further inland at Hitler's insistence. Its move toward the Normandy front on June 7th was one of the most costly daylight armored movements of the Western campaign. Allied aircraft attacked the columns so repeatedly and so effectively that the division arrived at the front having lost a significant proportion of its vehicles and its combat effectiveness. The specific price of the Rundstedt Compromise, the specific cost of not having the armor at the beach, was paid in the destroyed vehicles and the dead crew members of the Panzer Lehr Division on the roads of Normandy on June 7, 1944. Rommel's operational diary for the weeks following D-Day records a commander fighting a losing battle with a specific clarity about why he was losing it. The Allied air power made German armor movement in daylight suicidal. The Allied supply system brought resources to the front faster than the German logistics could match. The Allied naval bombardment, the guns of the warships offshore, could reach far inland and could be called down with precision and a weight of fire that the German artillery could not match. The specific material superiority that Rommel had understood from the North Africa experience was operating against him in Normandy in exactly the way he had predicted. His diary entries from this period make painful reading, not because they are dramatic, but because they are methodical and clear. He was a professional soldier making a professional assessment, and the professional assessment was that the battle was lost and that the question was no longer whether the Allies would break out, but when. He wrote to Hitler in late June requesting authorization to withdraw from the Cotentin Peninsula in order to shorten the front and concentrate his reserves for a counterattack against the breakout when it came. Hitler refused. The relationship between Rommel's professional assessment of the Normandy situation and the subsequent evolution of his position on the war itself is one of the more interesting dimensions of his final months. The professional clarity that led him to tell Hitler the military truth about Normandy, that the battle was lost, was the same clarity that led him toward the conclusion that the war itself was lost and that Germany's best course was to end it on whatever terms could be negotiated with the Western Allies. This was not a conclusion that Hitler was prepared to hear from any of his generals, and it was certainly not a conclusion that the Nazi system had any institutional mechanism for processing. The specific path from professional military assessment to participation in conspiracy against Hitler, or, in Rommel's case, to the proximity to the conspiracy that cost him his life, was not unusual among the senior German officers of 1944 who had access to the full military picture. Officers who could see clearly that the war was militarily lost, who had been unable to persuade Hitler this truth through the normal channels of military advice, who watched the Wehrmacht's best men and equipment being consumed in a cause that their professional judgment told them was already decided. These officers were the natural constituency of the resistance movement, whether or not they actively participated in it. Rommel's specific proximity to the July 20th conspiracy, knowing about it without joining it, reflected the specific form of his personal moral line. He was willing to tell Hitler the military truth. He was not willing to report men who were trying to remove Hitler. He was not willing to become an assassin or to publicly break with the regime. He occupied a position that combined elements of professional integrity and personal loyalty to individual conspirators without crossing the line into active resistance. This position did not save him. The investigation after July 20th was thorough enough to establish his knowledge of conspiracy, and Hitler's assessment of what that knowledge meant was clear. The forced suicide was the outcome of a moral position that was neither fish nor fowl, neither the loyalty of the committed Nazi nor the commitment of the active resistor, but something in between that satisfied neither the regime's demand for absolute loyalty nor the resistance movement's need for committed allies. He was 52 years old when he died. He had been a soldier for 34 years. He had commanded at various levels in 3 wars. He had achieved operational results that military historians study to this day as examples of the commander's art at its most creative. And he died on a rural road near his home of poison administered in the back of a German staff car because he knew about a bomb that had not killed Hitler and had not reported it. The specific distance between the two deaths that the Rommel story holds, the 52-year-old field marshal poisoned in a staff car, and the thousands of young men who died on the beaches that his defenses had fortified and that his strategy had been designed to make impassable, is the full measure of what the war was and what it cost. The soldiers who died on the beaches did not know Rommel. They knew the beach obstacle that his engineers had placed, the fortification that his crews had built, the defensive position that his inspection had demanded be improved. His strategy had not prevented their deaths. His absence on the morning of their crossing had been one of the factors that made their crossing possible. He understood all of this in the weeks between D-Day and his wounding and his forced retirement from command. His diaries show a man who understood that the war he had fought had been lost, that the battle he prepared for had been decided before he could shape it, and that the specific decision, the birthday trip, the wrong weather forecast, the absence of his post, had been one of the links in the chain of failures that produced the German defeat at Normandy. Whether acknowledging this privately was adequate is not a question the historical record can answer. It is a question for each reader to engage with. Given the full story of who Rommel was and what he did and what he failed to do, he was a gifted commander. He was a servant of a criminal state. He was present at the beach in every sense except the one that mattered on June 6. And the birthday he spent at home in Hurlingen is the specific human detail that connects his extraordinary military career to the specific morning when the war in the West was effectively decided. The Normandy American Cemetery on the bluff above Omaha Beach contains the graves of 9,388 American soldiers. The German Military Cemetery at La Cam, 10 kilometers west of Bayeux, contains the graves of 21,222 German soldiers. Both cemeteries are a record of what the Normandy campaign cost. Both are a short drive from the beaches where Rommel's defenses stood and where his absence on the morning of June 6 was one of the factors that shaped the outcome. He drove back to his headquarters that evening. He found the situation as bad as he had feared it would be. He fought the containment battle for 6 weeks and was then wounded and removed from command and eventually killed by the regime he had served. And the war continued for 11 more months, at a cost in lives that the decision at the birthday party in Hurlingen contributed, in its specific and limited way, to making necessary. That is the Rommel War, the birthday, the wrong weather forecast, the Panzers that were not at the beach, and the man who had spent 8 months building the defenses that might have stopped the Allied landing, driving toward La Roche-Guyon on the afternoon and evening of June 6, 1944, already too late. The specific character of Erwin Rommel, the man whose birthday decision is at the center of the story, is essential to understanding both why he was where he was on June 6th and what his absence meant for the German response to the landing. Rommel had built his career on personal leadership, on the specific kind of command that puts a commander at the point of decision, that leads from the front rather than from the headquarters, that makes a commander's physical presence the instrument through which the command intention is translated into action. In North Africa, this style had been spectacularly effective. He drove his staff officers into the ground, pushed his units faster than German logistical doctrine said was possible, appeared at crisis points when the crisis was at its worst, and by the sheer force of his presence and his will transform situations that looked like disasters into victories. This command style was not simply personality. It was a considered operational philosophy. Rommel believed that the commander's presence at the critical point, at the place where the battle was being decided, was more important than the commander's management of the overall situation from a distance. He was willing to lose touch with the larger picture in order to shape the specific point where the decision was being made. This approach had cost him in North Africa. There were moments when his forward presence had left his headquarters without adequate command direction, but its successes had outweighed its costs. In Normandy, the same approach had driven his inspection program, the walking of the beaches, the personal assessment of every defensive position, the pressure on his officers and his engineers that came from a commander's direct observation and direct demand. The Atlantic Wall that existed on June 6, 1944, was significantly stronger than the one Rommel had found in November 1943, and the difference was largely Rommel's personal drive. The irony is that this same personal leadership style, the willingness to be physically present at the point of decision, was exactly what the June 6 situation required, and exactly what Rommel was not providing because he was on the road from Hurlingen to La Rochegain. The point of decision on June 6 was not a beach or a fortification that he could walk to. It was a telephone and a map table in the headquarters, where the decision about the Panzer reserves was being contested in the institutional channels of the German command structure. And the institutional channel work, the calls to Hitler's headquarters, the arguments with the OKW staff, the pressure on the command structure that his authority and his relationship with Hitler gave him, was work that had to be done from his headquarters, not from a car on a French road. The North Africa campaign that had made Rommel's reputation is worth examining in the context of the D-Day story, because it illuminates both the qualities that made him the most dangerous German commander the Allies faced and the specific limitations that the Normandy situation would expose. The Afrika Korps campaign of 1941 and 1942 was Rommel at his best, working with limited forces, limited logistics, and against opponents who were initially more numerous and better equipped in many respects. He had used a specific combination of speed, surprise, and personal energy that characterized his command style to achieve operational results that should not have been possible given the resources available. The advance to El Alamein in June 1942, the deepest penetration of British defenses in North Africa, achieved in the aftermath of the fall of Tobruk, was one of the most impressive single operational achievements of the war. But El Alamein also exposed the limitations of Rommel's approach. The Battle of El Alamein in October 1942, Bernard Montgomery's attack that broke through the German-Italian lines and began the retreat that would eventually end in Tunisia, was a battle that Rommel's personal style could not reverse. The Allied material superiority, combined with Montgomery's methodical preparation and a specific defensive design that exploited the limitations of German logistics, produced a situation in which Rommel's operational creativity was insufficient to overcome the structural disadvantages that his army faced. The North Africa defeat and the subsequent loss of the entire Axis force in Tunisia in May 1943, when more than 200,000 Axis troops surrendered, was the end of Rommel's African career and the beginning of his assignment to the Atlantic Wall. The lessons he had taken from North Africa about the importance of air power, about the decisive role of logistics, about the need to fight the battle at the point of landing rather than letting the enemy establish himself, shaped his approach to the Normandy defense in specific ways. The specific lesson about air power was the most important. In North Africa, the growing Allied air superiority had made German armored movement in daylight increasingly costly and had disrupted the German supply chain in ways that ultimately made a defense untenable. In France, Rommel understood, better than most of his German colleagues, that the Allied air power superiority over the invasion area would make the movement of Panzer reserves in daylight operationally suicidal. The Panzers had to be at the beach before the Allied air forces could interdict them. Once the landing was established and the Allied fighter-bombers were ranging over the Norman countryside, moving armor in daylight would cost more than it achieved. This insight, derived from the specific experience of the North Africa campaign and applied to the Normandy situation, was the basis of his beach counterattack doctrine. It was correct. The subsequent experience of the Normandy campaign validated it completely. The German panzer divisions that tried to move to the front in daylight in June and July 1944 were attacked from the air at every step, sustaining losses that degraded their combat effectiveness before they reached the positions where they were supposed to fight. What Rommel could not do was persuade the German command structure to implement the doctrine fully. Hitler's control of the Panzer reserves, the compromise with Rundstedt's different approach, and the specific failure of the command arrangement to respond adequately to the June 6th landing. These were the structural failures that his doctrine was designed to avoid and that his absence from his headquarters on the morning of D-Day allowed to compound. The relationship between Rommel and the German resistance to Hitler, the specific dimension of his story that ended with his forced suicide in October 1944, adds a moral complexity to the Rommel narrative that the purely military assessment tends to minimize. Rommel was not a Nazi. He had never been a member of the party. He had not participated in the crimes of the regime. The specific atrocities that the Wehrmacht committed in the Soviet Union and in occupied Europe were not part of his operational record. His campaigns have been fought in North Africa and in France, where the specific form of German military brutality that characterized the Eastern Front was less prevalent. He had ordered that Jewish prisoners taken in North Africa be treated as prisoners of war rather than being turned over to the SS, an order that was a specific violation of standing Nazi policy. But he had served the regime. He had fought its wars. He had accepted its promotions and its public honors. He had been, for much of the war, the German commander most visible to the Allied public. The Desert Fox, whose operational creativity and tactical aggression made him simultaneously the most admired and most feared German general. His cooperation with the regime, however personal rather than ideological in its character, was cooperation that served the regime's military objectives. The specific dimension of his resistance, the specific knowledge of the July 20 conspiracy, and the specific choice not to report it, was a private act of non-compliance that stopped well short of active resistance. He knew the conspirators. He knew their intention. He declined to betray them. But he also declined to join them, to put his authority and his reputation actively behind the attempt that might, if it had succeeded, have ended the war sooner and with fewer lives lost. The moral accounting of this position, the refusal to betray combined with the refusal to fully commit, is not comfortable in either direction. It is not the moral heroism of the active resistor. It is not the moral failure of the willing collaborator. It is the specific moral position of a man who knew that the regime was wrong, who was not willing to report those who were trying to end it, and who was also not willing to take the risk of active participation in the attempt. He was not a hero of the German resistance. He was a professional soldier who served a criminal state, because that was a state that Germany had become in his lifetime, and who drew a personal moral line of betrayal of conspirators without being willing to become one of them. It is a position that history can understand, and that history cannot fully honor. The specific fact of his death, the rural road, the poison, the fiction of the state funeral, are the appropriate ending for a story of this kind. He died in the service of a regime that had become his executioner, killed for the specific crime of knowing about an attempt to remove the man whose criminal leadership he had served. The cruelty of this ending is real, and it is part of the accounting. His grave is in Hurlingen, in the churchyard of the village where he lived and where he celebrated his wife's birthday on June 5, 1944. The house is still there. The road he drove on that morning is still there. The beach defenses he built are still there. Some of them, the concrete remains at the sea and the decades have not yet dissolved. And the Normandy American Cemetery is still there too, on the bluff above Omaha Beach, with the graves of the men who died on the beach that Rommel had built the defenses for and had not been at his post to direct the counterattack against. Both things are part of the truth of what happened on June 6, 1944. The birthday that took Rommel away from his headquarters, the landing that succeeded in his absence, the Panzers that never made it to the beach, and the men on both sides who paid for the decisions, the specific human cost of the specific choices. That shaped what that morning became. Erwin Rommel had arrived in France in late 1943 to assess and strengthen the German coastal defenses. What he found alarmed him. The Atlantic Wall, the system of fortifications that Hitler's propaganda had presented to the German public as an impenetrable barrier of concrete and steel, was, in the reality of late 1943, more aspiration than achievement. The fortifications along the most likely invasion beaches were incomplete, inadequately armed, and defended by infantry of variable quality that included a significant proportion of non-German units, Eastern European conscripts, men captured on the Eastern Front, and given the choice between a German uniform and a prison camp, and rear area troops who had been transferred to the coastal defense role without adequate training. Rommel set about changing this with a specific intensity that had characterized his command throughout his career. He walked the beaches. He drove the coastal roads. He made personal inspections of fortifications and found them lacking and demanded improvements. He insisted on the installation of millions of beach obstacles, the steel hedgehogs, the wooden stakes, the teller mines, that would tear apart landing craft and channel the attacking infantry into kill zones. He pushed his engineering staff and his construction crews at a pace that made them exhausted and resentful and more effective than they would have been under any other commander. His strategic concept for the defense of Normandy, and this is where the Rommel story intersects most directly with the D-Day decision, was specific and controversial. Rommel believed that the decisive moment of any Allied landing would be the first 24 hours. If the Germans could bring their armor reserves to the beach quickly and counterattack, while the Allied landing force was most vulnerable, before it had consolidated its beachhead, before the follow-on forces had come ashore, before the Allied air power had established a pattern of operations that would make German armor movement in daylight suicidal, they could drive the landing back into the sea. If they missed that window, if the Panzers were held back waiting for permission from Hitler's headquarters that was slow in coming, the battle would be lost. This view was not universally shared in the German military establishment. Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, the theater commander, held the opposite view. The Panzers should be held back from the coast, concentrated in reserve, and committed only when the location of the main Allied effort was clear. Committing armor to the beach before the main landing was identified risked losing the Panzers against a diversionary attack, while the real landing force came ashore elsewhere. The argument between Rommel and Rundstedt was real and substantive, and it reflected a genuine strategic uncertainty that the German command faced in the spring of 1944. The Allies might land at Calais, the shortest crossing, the most obvious choice, or at Normandy, or in the Bay of Biscay, or in any of several other locations along the French coast. The German intelligence picture, as we have discussed in the episode on the double cross system, was systematically distorted by the fortitude deception that kept German attention focused on Calais. Committing Panzer reserves to the beach at any single location risked stripping the reserves from the locations where the main Allied blow might actually fall. Hitler resolved the argument in the worst possible way. He divided the Panzer reserves between Rommel's concept and Rundstedt's, leaving some armor near the coast under Rommel's influence and retaining others in a central reserve under OKW control that required Hitler's personal authorization to release. This compromise meant that neither concept was fully implemented. The armor near the coast was not close enough or numerous enough to execute the immediate counterattack that Rommel's strategy required. The armor in the Central Reserve could not be committed without Hitler's authorization, which was slow in coming on June 6 because Hitler was asleep when the landings began, and his staff declined to wake him. Rommel's absence from his headquarters on June 6 compounded this institutional failure in specific ways. As the Army Group B commander, he was the officer with the authority and the will to push hardest for the immediate release of the Panzer reserves, to call Hitler's headquarters directly, to demand that the armor be committed before the window closed, to use the personal authority that his relationship with Hitler gave him to cut through the institutional hesitation that was delaying the response. Without him, the chain of command had to operate through officers who were either less confident about pressing Hitler or less convinced that the immediate commitment was necessary. The calls that went to Rommel's headquarters on the morning of June 6, the calls that his chief of staff made, and that reached Rommel at his home in Hurlingen, paint a picture of a command structure in disarray. The initial German response to the Allied landing had been uncertain, partly because the fortitude deception was still operating, convincing German intelligence that Normandy might be a feint and that the main landing was still coming at Calais. Officers who might have pushed harder for the Panzer release hesitated, waiting for clarity that the intelligence picture was not providing. Rommel was driving toward his headquarters while these hours were passing. He could not make the calls he would have made if he had been at his desk. He could not apply the personal pressure on the command structure that his presence would have allowed, and the Panzers that he had insisted needed to be at the beach were not at the beach. The 21st Panzer Division, which was the armored unit closest to the Normandy beaches, received its orders to attack in the afternoon of June 6th, after the Allied forces had been ashore for hours and had begun consolidating their positions. The attack that the 21st Panzer launched achieved local success, but could not reverse the fundamental situation. The Allied beachhead was established. The follow-on forces were coming ashore, and the window for the immediate counterattack that Rommel's strategy had required was already closing. The question of what difference Rommel's presence would have made is, as I said, unanswerable with certainty. The structural problems that hampered the German response on June 6, Hitler's control of the Panzer reserves, the fortitude deception's distortion of the German intelligence picture, the command arrangement that had divided authority between Rommel and Rundstedt, would not have disappeared simply because Rommel was at his headquarters rather than at his home in Hurlingen. The specific institutional failure that kept the Panzers back until it was too late was not simply a failure of one man's presence. It was a failure of the command structure that the compromise between Rommel's and Rundstedt's strategies had produced. But Rommel's presence might have made a difference at the margins. He might have pushed harder and faster for the release of the Panzer reserves. He might have cut through the hesitation about Normandy being a feint, committing to the judgment that this was the main landing earlier than the institutional response allowed. He might have created the sense of urgency in the command structure that his absence could not provide. Whether any of these differences would have been sufficient to change the outcome of D-Day is a question that the evidence cannot answer. What the evidence does tell us is that Rommel understood, when he arrived at La Rocheguyon on the evening of June 6th, that the opportunity had been missed. His operational diary for that evening records a commander who has assessed the situation and concluded that the battle for Normandy would be decided by the ability of the German forces to contain the Allied beachhead, while the Allied air power and the Allied supply system made the German position increasingly untenable. He was already, on the first evening of the campaign, thinking about containment rather than counterattack, thinking about how to prevent the Allied breakout rather than how to drive the Allies back into the sea. The specific decision that had created the situation, the decision to leave for his wife's birthday, was a decision that Rommel had made against the specific background of his assessment of Allied intentions. He had concluded, on the basis of the weather forecast and his reading of the intelligence picture, that an Allied landing was not imminent. The weather in the Channel in early June 1944 was bad by any standard. Rough seas, overcast skies, conditions that both the Allied and German meteorologists agreed were unsuitable for a large-scale amphibious operation. Rommel's own meteorologists had told him that the conditions would remain unsuitable for at least several more days. He had taken their advice. The Allied meteorologist, Group Captain James Stagg, had identified a brief window of improvement in the weather, the same window that Eisenhower had trusted when he gave the order to go on the evening of June 4th. The German meteorologists had not identified this window. The weather prediction models available to both sides were imperfect, but the Allied Meteorological Service's track record in the specific conditions of the English Channel in June 1944 was apparently better than the German services. The irony of this, that the German defensive commander's decision to leave was based on a weather forecast that was less accurate than the Allied forecast that prompted the attack, is one of the more striking details of the D-Day story. Rommel trusted his meteorologists, and they were wrong. Eisenhower trusted his meteorologists, and they were right. And the gap between the two forecasts, the specific meteorological advantage that Stagg's briefing gave Eisenhower over the German commanders who had dismissed the same window as too uncertain to use, was one of the factors that made the June 6th landing possible. There is one more dimension of the Rommel story that the standard D-Day narrative tends to underemphasize, and it concerns a specific way that Rommel's relationship with Hitler shaped his ability to command effectively in the weeks before D-Day. Rommel's advocacy for the Panzer at the beach strategy was not simply a military argument. It was a political argument within the German command structure, an argument that required him to press Hitler directly, to use his personal relationship with the Führer to obtain what the institutional command structure would not provide. Rommel had been Hitler's favorite general for much of the war. The Desert Fox, the commander of the Afrika Korps, the man who had beaten the British in North Africa with panache and aggression that delighted Hitler's theatrical sensibility. This relationship gave Rommel access to Hitler that other commanders did not have, but it also came with costs. Rommel's advocacy for the Panzer deployment was partly blocked by the same relationship. Hitler's personal interest in controlling the armor reserves, his unwillingness to delegate the decisive commitment of armor to any commander, his belief that his own strategic judgment should govern the decisive moment of the battle. Rommel could ask for the Panzers. Hitler could say no, and the command arrangement that had divided the reserves between Rommel's concept and the OKW reserve was Hitler's way of saying both yes and no simultaneously, a compromise that satisfied neither the Rommel doctrine nor the Rundstedt doctrine, and that left the German defense with the weaknesses of both. The specific call that Rommel needed to make on the morning of June 6, the call to Hitler's headquarters demanding the immediate release of the Panzer reserves, was a call that required both the authority that his position gave him and the personal forcefulness that his relationship with Hitler required. Without him at his headquarters, without his voice on the line to Berchtesgaden, the call was made by officers who had neither the same authority nor the same personal relationship. The hesitation that resulted was not simply bureaucratic. It was a specific hesitation of a command structure trying to function without its most forceful advocate for the urgent commitment that the situation required. By the time Hitler authorized the release of the Panzer reserves in the late afternoon of June 6, the window that Rommel had been convinced would determine the battle's outcome had already passed. The Allied beachhead was established. The 21st Panzer Division's attack had been too late and too limited to reverse the situation. The armored forces that had been held in reserve waiting for Hitler's authorization had missed the only opportunity they would have to fulfill the role that Rommel's strategy had designed for them. Rommel drove back to his headquarters from his wife's birthday celebration as fast as his car could carry him. He arrived at La Rochegain in the evening and assessed the situation and understood what had been lost. He would spend the next 6 weeks trying to contain the Allied beachhead, fighting the battle of attrition in the Normandy hedgerows that his strategy had been designed to prevent, watching the Allied air power make German armor movement in daylight increasingly costly, watching the Allied supply system bring resources to the battle that the German logistics could not match. On July 17, 1944, his staff car was attacked by Allied aircraft on a road in Normandy. He was severely wounded, thrown from the car, and evacuated to Germany. He did not return to France. His active military career was effectively over. 3 days later, on July 20th, 1944, a group of German officers attempted to assassinate Hitler at the Wolf's Lair in East Prussia. The bomb planted by Colonel Claus von Stauffenberg killed 4 people, but left Hitler alive. The subsequent investigation identified Rommel as having known about the plot, not as an active participant, but as a figure who the conspirators expected would support a post-Hitler government that would negotiate with the Western Allies. The evidence is debated, but the essential fact is not. Rommel knew the conspiracy existed and did not report it. Hitler gave Rommel a choice: a public trial as a traitor, with the consequences for his family and his reputation that a public trial would bring, or a private suicide, with the fiction of a death from his wounds and a state funeral with full military honors. Rommel chose a suicide. On October 14, 1944, he was driven to a quiet spot on a rural road near his home in Hurlingen, the same home he had left in his car on the morning of June 5th to fly to Stuttgart for his wife's birthday, and he took poison. He was dead within minutes. He was 52 years old. The German public was told he had died of his wounds. His state funeral was attended by von Rundstedt, who read the eulogy and who knew the truth of how Rommel had died. Hitler sent a wreath, the specific cruelty of this ending. The man who had spent his career in loyal service to a regime that had betrayed everything he had believed about Germany, killed by that regime for the specific act of knowing about a conspiracy that most of the German officers who knew about it had also declined to report. It is part of the Rommel story that the military biography tends to handle carefully, and that the full accounting requires stating plainly. Rommel was a gifted commander who served a criminal state. He was not a Nazi in any ideological sense. His personal papers and the account of those who knew him suggest a man whose commitments were to the soldier's craft and to Germany as a nation rather than to the specific ideology that governed it. But he served the state nonetheless, and the campaigns he conducted, including the North Africa campaign, served the military objectives of a regime that was simultaneously conducting the Holocaust. The specific moral accounting of a career like Rommel's, the military genius in service of criminal state, is not resolved by acknowledging the genius alone. He died in a car on a rural road near his home, 50 yards from the house where he had celebrated his wife's birthday on the eve of D-Day. The distance between the two events, the birthday party and the forced suicide, is less than a year. In that year, the Allied landing he had not been able to prevent had succeeded. The battle for France had been lost. Germany was being invaded from both east and west, and the war that Rommel had fought in North Africa and that he had been preparing to defend against in France was clearly and irreversibly lost. He knew this. The accounts of those who spoke with him in the final months of his life suggest a man who understood that the war was over and that what remained was the management of the ending, an ending that his own assassination attempt idea had been designed to accelerate. He had wanted to negotiate with the Western Allies, to find a way to end the war on the Western Front while maintaining the Eastern Front against the Soviet Union. This was not a morally coherent position. It would have preserved the Nazi state long enough to continue the Holocaust in the East while making peace in the West, but it was a specific form that Rommel's desire to end the war had taken in the summer of 1944. He did not get the opportunity to pursue it. The July 20th plot failed. Hitler survived. The war continued for another 10 months, and Rommel was dead before the winter. The birthday he celebrated in Hurlingen on June 5, 1944, is the hinge on which his personal story turns. If he had not left for it, if he had remained at La Rochegayen, monitoring the weather, waiting for the window that he did not believe would open, he would have been at his headquarters when the call came. He would have driven to the forward positions. He would have pushed for the Panzer release with everything he had. Whether it would have been enough is a question that cannot be answered. Whether his absence made D-Day more likely to succeed is a question that the evidence supports but cannot establish with certainty. What is certain is that he was not there. The Allied landing succeeded. The battle for France was decided in the weeks that followed, and the German general who understood better than anyone else what the beach counterattack required was in a car driving back to his headquarters 16 hours after the opportunity he had planned for had already passed. That is the Rommel War. The birthday that put him on the road when he should have been at his desk. The weather forecast that was wrong when it needed to be right. The Panzer reserves that were not at the beach when the beach was a decisive point. And the man who had spent 8 months building the defenses that might have stopped the Allied landing, driving toward a battle he was already too late to shape. The specific legacy of Erwin Rommel in German memory and in military history is one of the more contested topics in the historiography of the Second World War, and the D-Day story sits at the center of the most significant of these contests. In the immediate post-war period, Rommel's reputation in Germany was shaped by the specific narrative that his family and his former staff officers promoted. The narrative of Rommel as the clean general, the professional soldier who served Germany without participating in the crimes of the Nazi regime, who ultimately recognized the criminal character of what he was serving and moved, however cautiously, toward resistance. This narrative served multiple purposes. It gave Germans a version of the Wehrmacht that could be honored without endorsing what the Wehrmacht had been part of. It gave Rommel's family a version of his death that was not simply regime execution. It gave the West German military establishment a usable military hero for the new Bundeswehr that was being created in the 1950s. The historical scholarship that has developed since the immediate post-war period has complicated this narrative without entirely destroying it. Rommel was not a war criminal in the sense that the officers of the Einsatzgruppen were war criminals. His campaigns were fought in theaters where the specific atrocities of the Nazi regime's racial warfare were less prominent. His personal instructions about the treatment of prisoners in North Africa reflected a genuine commitment to the laws of war that distinguished him from many of his colleagues. But the clean Wehrmacht narrative requires minimizing the specific ways in which Rommel's service contributed to the Nazi regime's military objectives, the ways in which his operational brilliance served a state that was simultaneously conducting the Holocaust, in which his campaigns created the conditions for the regime's broader aims, even if he was not personally participating in the crimes. The accounting of a career like Rommel's requires holding both his genuine personal integrity and the fact of what his service contributed to. The D-Day story sits within this accounting because it is the specific moment when Rommel's strategy, if it had succeeded, would have prolonged a war that was simultaneously a campaign of extermination. A successful beach counterattack that drove the Allied landing back into the sea would have been, from a purely military perspective, a brilliant defensive achievement. It would also have been a contribution to the continuation of the Holocaust for as long as the war continued. The moral weight of this dimension of the Rommel story is not resolved by acknowledging his personal integrity or his technical military skill. He understood this, perhaps, in the final months of his life, the months between D-Day and his forced suicide. His advocacy for a negotiated end to the war with the Western Allies was partly a professional judgment that the military situation was hopeless, and partly a moral judgment that the war needed to end. Whether he understood the full dimension of what the war's continuation was costing, whether the Holocaust was part of what he was trying to end, is a question that his surviving papers do not clearly answer. He died before he could find out what the end of the war actually looked like. He died before the liberation of the concentration camps. He died before the full truth of what the regime he had served had been doing became part of the public record. He died in Hurlingen on a rural road, from poison, 50 years old, the regime's executioner doing what the regime did to those who were no longer useful to it. The birthday party in Hurlingen, the wrong weather forecast, the absence from his post, the Panzers that were not at the beach. These are the specific details of the specific story of what happened on June 6, 1944. They are the human content of one of history's most consequential days. And the man at their center, the German commander who understood better than anyone what the beach defense required, and who was not at the beach when the defense was required, is one of the most complex figures in the history of the Second World War. Complex enough that the accounting of his story requires all of it: the genius and the service, the integrity and complicity, the birthday that took him away and the poisoned road that ended him, and the beaches of Normandy that are both his monument and his judgment. That is the Rommel War. The specific physical geography of the Normandy battlefield, the beaches, the bluffs, the hedgerow country of the bocage that stretches south from the coast, is worth describing as a final illustration of what Rommel's strategy was designed to address and why it mattered so much where the Panzers were when the landing came. The Normandy beaches are not dramatic in the way that Pacific Island beaches are dramatic. They are wide and flat, and in many places unremarkable. Long stretches of sand backed by gentle dunes or low bluffs, with the channel visible to the north and the agricultural landscape of Normandy to the south. They are beautiful in the specific way that the northern French coast is beautiful, which is to say not quite dramatic, but genuine and particular. The gray-green water, the pale sand, the sky that is almost always doing something interesting. What makes the beaches significant is the specific combination of their width and their exposure. The wide, flat beaches that made the Allied landing so difficult on June 6, the long walk across open sand under fire, also created, from the German defensive perspective, a killing ground that properly positioned defenders could make extraordinarily costly. The concrete bunkers and gun positions that Rommel had been building since November 1943 were designed to cover exactly this ground, to bring fire from multiple directions onto men coming across the flat beach, to make the approach from the water to the seawall, or the dune line a gauntlet that no infantry unit could cross without massive casualties. At Omaha, this design worked better than at any other beach on June 6. The German defenses were intact, the naval bombardment had missed, and the American forces came off their landing craft into exactly the kind of fire that the fortifications had been designed to produce. The 2,000 American casualties at Omaha Beach on June 6 are the specific evidence of what Rommel's defensive design was capable of when it was fully operational. At the other beaches, Utah, Gold, Juneau, Sword, the defenses were less complete. The naval bombardment was more effective, and the specific combination of Allied firepower and Allied tactics allowed the landing forces to clear the beaches at lower cost. But even at these beaches, the casualties were real and significant, and the specific accomplishment of the men who crossed them was real and significant in return. What Rommel's strategy required was armor behind those beach defenses, Panzer units that could arrive at the beach within hours of the landing, before the Allied forces could consolidate their positions, and drive the landing force back into the sea before the follow-on waves arrived to reinforce it. Without the armor, the beach defenses alone could not hold the Allied assault indefinitely. They could slow it, make it costly, impose a price on the crossing, but they could not, without armored counterattack, prevent the eventual establishment of the beachhead. This was the specific strategic calculation that Rommel had made and that the June 6 events validated. The beach defenses imposed a significant cost on the Allied landing. The beach defenses without immediate armored support could not reverse it. The armored support that might have reversed it was not at the beach. The counterfactual: what would have happened if the 21st Panzer Division and the 12th SS Panzer Division and the Panzer Lehr had all been positioned within striking distance of the beach, and if the command authorization for their immediate commitment had been available on the morning of June 6? And if Rommel had been at his headquarters to push for that authorization with everything his position and his relationship with Hitler gave him, that counterfactual is the one that military historians have been unable to resolve, and that the surviving participants were unable to resolve even when their memories of it were fresh. The closest thing to a consensus that the historical scholarship has reached is this: the structural conditions for a successful beach counterattack were not fully present on June 6, 1944, regardless of where Rommel was. Hitler's control of the Panzer reserves, the fortitude deception's distortion of the intelligence picture, the specific command compromise that had divided authority between Rommel's concept and the OKW reserve, These structural failures would have impeded the German response even if Rommel had been at his desk from the moment the first Allied paratroopers landed in Normandy. His presence might have improved the response at the margins. It could not have overcome the structural failures that his own advocacy had not been able to prevent. But the margin matters. In a battle decided by hours and miles and specific decisions of specific commanders, the margin between a more effective German response and the actual German response might have been the difference between a contained Allied beachhead and a beachhead that broke out. The specific casualties on the Allied side in the weeks following D-Day, the grinding battles of the Bocage, the costly advance through the hedgerow country of Normandy, were partly the product of a German defense that was less disrupted by the landing than Rommel's strategy had hoped to make it, and partly the product of the Allied forces having to fight through terrain that the Panzer counterattack would have contested differently. These are the calculations of military history, the specific assessments of specific situations that the evidence supports but cannot fully establish. They are the calculations that Rommel himself was making the weeks between D-Day and his wounding, driving through the Norman countryside in a staff car, inspecting positions and assessing the situation, and understand with increasing clarity what had been lost and why. He understood the birthday decision in this context. He did not write about it directly. His operational diary is not a personal journal, and a specific emotional accounting of what it meant to have been away from his headquarters on the morning of D-Day is not preserved in any document that survives. But the subsequent urgency of his communications, the pressure on Hitler's headquarters, the repeated requests for resources, the specific and accurate assessment of why the German position was becoming untenable, reflect a commander who understood that the situation he was managing was partly of his own making by the specific choice to go home for a birthday, the wrong forecast, the empty headquarters, the Panzers that were not at the beach. These are the specific details of the specific story of June 6, 1944. The details that connect the largest military operation in history to the specific human choice of one man on one morning. That is the Rommel War.